Hello listeners. Mr. Bookman here. Before we get to today's story, subscribe to the channel and click the like button. You can now follow me on Facebook. The link is in the description. I just read that the average person spends 3 hours a day on their cell phones. Now everyone including you can use their cell phones to make $25 or even up to $50 an hour with social media jobs. No experience required to work your own hours from anywhere in the world. Click the link in the description to start making money right now. Now let's dive right into today's book.
Section 10 of The Cruise of the Scandal and Other Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Cruise of the Scandal and Other Stories by Victor Bridges. A Bit of Old Chelsea. We were strolling through the restful streets of Chelsea when we came suddenly upon a picturesque little tavern close to the Thames. It was half covered with ivy, and from the wooden balcony above, long trailing geraniums hung down and mingled with the dark green leaves. There was a weather-beaten signboard with a picture of a cunning-looking man in a cocked hat. It was called the Lord Nelson. "That's a quaint old place," said George carelessly. "Very," I replied. "So picturesque. I wonder what it's like inside. Shall we have a look?" "Certainly," I said. I always try to fall in with my friends' wishes, even when I don't approve of them. I may be wrong, but that is my idea of friendship. George is a journalist with a strange craving for the interiors of taverns. He says they are such excellent places in which to study character. From the outsider's point of view, studying character seems to be the chief part of journalism, and I should think few men worked harder at it than George does. We pushed open a door marked Saloon, and found ourselves in a narrow compartment just large enough to contain 4 people without inconvenience. One of the seats was already occupied by an amiable-looking wreck who was fast asleep with his head on the counter. The public bar exactly opposite contained 5 or 6 navvies in various stages of intoxication, and the barman, a smart-looking man of about 35, was attending to their wants. "Seems a bit tired," remarked George, looking critically at our companion. "Been studying too much character," I suggested. George was just beginning a sarcastic reply when the barman came across to take our orders. We decided on 2 glasses of what I once heard a temperance lecturer describe as hell-filling alcohol, and while the barman was getting them ready, George entered into conversation with him. "Who's our friend?" he inquired, indicating the recumbent reveler in the corner. "Dunno his name," said the barman, snipping the wire off the Perrier. "Calls him Billy Borndrunk round here, and he seems satisfied." "Got a pretty tough lot opposite, haven't you?" I asked. The barman's face assumed an expression of intense disgust. "Tush," he remarked. "They're mending the embankment, and come along here after work. They fair mop it, I can tell you. And when they get snarsty, I have to learn 'em something afore I'm done with 'em." He was only 5'6", but he spoke with confidence, and I felt that it was no vain boasting. "You know something about it, eh?" He closed an eye and smiled scornfully. "Quite enough for any of them to go on with." Then he left us, for the gentlemen opposite were becoming clamorous for more liquor. During the next few minutes we sat there in silence. George was evidently making a mental sketch of Billy Borndrunk and with the sympathy of the true artist, I refrained from interrupting him. I amused myself by idly scanning the various bottles which were piled up on shelves at the blade, together with a few packets of cheap cigarettes and some weary-looking ferns. This is a favorite pastime of mine when George insists on taking me into taverns. I like to speculate dreamily upon the various flavors. If one is not really fond of drink, one can do this without feeling ashamed. It becomes a purely intellectual pursuit. Suddenly I was aware of a disturbance in the opposite bar. A dialogue was in progress between my friend the barman and a gigantic navvy, proportionately inebriated. "Pot o' arf and arf, and not so much jaw," demanded the latter. "You won't get no more here," replied the barman coldly. "You're drunk as it is. Go home to bed." "Who is drunk?" inquired the navvy indignantly. "You are," said the barman. "Beastly." Then civilization slipped off the navvy like a discarded cloak. "I'm drunk, am I?" he roared. "Keep that!" His fist shot out and, landing somewhere in the neighborhood of the barman's right eye, drove that gentleman across the bar with such velocity that he struck the counter close to us with considerable force. "That's for your cheek," observed the navvy, in the voice of one whose honor has been satisfied. The remaining customers, with the honorable exception of Billy Born Drunk, rose hastily to their feet, and a chorus of criticism filled the tavern. "Serve him right." "Shut your head." "Don't be a fool, Bill." "Hit him back." This last from George. I remembered the barman's boast, and was silent in pleasant expectation. To my intense disappointment, however, the blow seemed to have cowed him. He pulled himself together and slowly retraced his steps, holding his hand up to his face. "You hadn't no call to hit me like that," he began reproachfully. "What's your order?" "Pot o' arf and arf, and when I comes in here again, perhaps you'll be a bit more polite. See?" The navvy leaned across the counter and grinned derisively. He never grinned again, at least not under similar circumstances. With amazing swiftness, the barman whipped out a large pewter pot from under the counter and struck him a swinging blow across the face, sending him to the floor with a thud that shook the building. "That's for your cheek," he remarked. Then he coolly picked up the cloth and began to polish the tankard. "That's the worst of them, dirty faces," he observed. "Spoils the silver." An awestruck silence fell upon us all, while the navvy rose up slowly with a brand of can upon his cheek. I do not know how to spell the words, or I would tell you what he said. When he had done, the barman eyed him critically. "I ain't got much time to spare for pleasure," he replied. "But if you likes to step round to the yard beyond, we'll give that there Mark a bit of company." The navvy's eyes glistened, and the whole tavern, with the exception of Billy Born Drunk, rose joyously to the suggestion. The barman walked to the side door and called to his wife. "Annie," he said, "just look after the bar while I show these gentlemen our backyard." We all trooped out, leaving Billy Born Drunk in sole possession. It seemed a shame that he should miss the fight, but it would have taken some hours to wake him up, and by that time everything would have been over. Outside we were joined by 2 or 3 stray inhabitants of Chelsea, who had been busily engaged in their usual strenuous work of leaning over the railings and spitting in the Thames. Scenting a welcome diversion, They lounged up and listened with philosophic calm to the navvy's lurid descriptions of how he was about to operate upon his opponent. Then there was a sound of bolts being withdrawn, and the barman opened the gate that led into the yard. It was quite small, paved with cobbles, and surrounded by high brick walls. Scarcely the place that I should have selected for a fight, unless I felt very certain that I was going to win. The barman closed the gate, and we all ranged ourselves round the walls, while he and the navvy removed their superfluous clothing and took up their positions in opposite corners. George, who is a bit of a sportsman, volunteered to act as timekeeper. There was a moment of almost breathless silence, and then he gave the word. "Time!" The barman took 3 quick steps forward and planted himself firmly in the center of the ring. In another second, the navvy was upon him, head down and hitting like a flail. There was a gorgeous whirl of arms, a couple of sharp smacking blows, and the navvy suddenly sat down with his hand to his eye, while the little man danced away, apparently uninjured. 2 or 3 of the fallen warrior's companions advanced and set him upon his feet. "Go for his wind, Bill," suggested one. "Stand off and pot him clever," added another. "Close with him," said a third. The navvy drew the back of his hand across his face and shoved them roughly aside. "I'll kill him afore I'm done with him," he muttered. His friends retreated to the wall, and the 2 men faced each other again. This time it was the barman's turn to attack. Without a moment's hesitation, he waltzed in, and, ducking a terrific swing, landed a straight left on his opponent's nose that brought a roar of mingled anguish and fury from its owner's lips. Whether it was the pain, or whether the blood of some forgotten French ancestor was stirring in his veins, I cannot say, but the navvy now threw aside all pretensions to following the rules of the ring, and rushing forward, kicked at his enemy with all the force of which he was capable. My heart seemed to jump into my mouth, for I felt certain that the barman's hour had come. The navvy's boot looked as if it were capable of opening the door for any soul in England. With a brilliant effort, however, the barman leaped on one side and, using his right hand for the first time in the fight, smote the navvy a deadly blow across his disfigured countenance that stretched him upon the yard and abruptly terminated the struggle. George counted him out with all the dignity of a professional timekeeper, but he made no effort to rise, for the barman stood over him, waiting to rebuke him for his attempted treachery. Then he began to roll about as though in great pain. "Brandy," he moaned feebly. "Give me some brandy." The barman walked across the yard and picked up a huge bucket of clean water. He had evidently guessed the navvy's weak point, for the latter rose quickly, if somewhat unsteadily, to his feet, with the expression of a man who has narrowly escaped some strange and horrible danger. He staggered slowly to the gate, and then, turning round, addressed his late opponent in a voice of dignified rebuke. "That's how you lose custom. I shan't come here no more." End of section 10. Read by Kerry Adams, your book voice, at Mesa, Arizona, on the 5th of April, 2022.
Well, listeners, it looks like we have come to the end of the story. On your way out, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Make sure you click on the link in the description if you want to start making money right now with social media jobs. Just know you are appreciated. Mr. Bookman is now signing off.